the word that you have for this episode is be curious. And let's talk about what that is, what that means in regards to parenting, in regards to being a teenager.
I think it had some popularity with Ted Lasso. There's the episode where he's playing darts, and he talks about people who prejudge, and it just like they made judgments about him. They didn't know who he was. They just made judgments based on what they saw, what they assumed, and it wasn't about him. It was about them. I think that it's a pretty good observation that if we're having a hard time in a relationship with our kids, with our spouse or whatever,
Coworkers,
can be small things, can be big things. It can be things that we can't avoid, but like they still like cause friction. If we're having a hard time, it doesn't always mean it's about them. We're a little bit like the oyster with the pearl. We want to find whatever that annoying thing is and coat it and make it smooth. But we're not always great at knowing what the source of our problems are. We kind of get more like a spidey sense, right? Like the tingle of like something's off.
Yeah.
And then we start getting into solving mode before we like even really know what it is that we're solving.
I love that so much because what you're describing is your method and my method. And the joyrific chart was created. I don't do it perfect. If anything, it was created for me to be a better human. And it was because of the skills that you brought to our relationship that really developed this into what it is today.
It's just starting from the assumption that I don't know what I'm doing, but I can figure it out. And when we're talking about relationships and we're talking about critical moments that turn into critical conversations, it's that sort of thing of like, well, first of all, I need to know what's going on here. Because if you move straight to, I know what's happening, I need to make this action, we lose out on the opportunity sometimes to understand, but even more important for the child or the other person, for them to understand. Like oftentimes they have even less awareness about what they're thinking and feeling because they haven't had a chance to process.
Yeah.
So being curious often means that you're giving them a chance to think about, what am I struggling with? Why am I struggling? Why did I have that response? Doesn't mean that we're always going to get to it. We're not going to find the cause and effect 100%, but it does give us a second to be reflective and to think through what was happening. The hard part about this is like, we're not trying to encourage kids or other people of like, I need to make sure to protect myself by lying, right? Like I need to tell this person the sort of answer that would make me come across the best in this situation.
And sometimes that happens with kids, especially if you've like painted them in a corner.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you can't fault them for that. Like it's a bit of, they know they're going to get in trouble. And if they're in trouble, things go worse. So they know that they should have tried to avoid avoid getting into trouble. But the action's already been done. So now they're like on cleanup. They're just like damage control. And there's a time and a place for all these things, right? When someone is bleeding, you don't stop and like, oh, I wonder how this happened. Like first, let's figure out how to solve the emergency, reduce the amount of damage. And I think that's true of just about everything. Like there is a time where we do need to take an action first. We need to separate. We need to calm down. We need to find something that can help re-engage the amygdala, that can help re-engage the ability to process. Because when the kids are screaming at each other, or somebody is hurt, either emotionally or physically, you're not going to get good answers. You're not going to get insightful anything. They're not going to even remember half of it. It's not going to be real to them.
But what you do is you continue to stay in that space of being curious.
Yeah. I don't do any of these things perfect. I do believe that everyone is trying to do good. I do think at some level we sometimes have been taught that we have to prioritize ourselves over other people, and that good is a finite quantity of stuff. And so we have to make sure that we are seeking out our good, and not let anybody else get that away from us.
It's the zero sum.
Yeah, the zero sum fallacy. It is a fallacy to think that, or to let our kids think that they have to beat out each other, that by knocking somebody else down, that somehow makes you elevated in comparison. Because having that mentality, it's lonely. It's lonely in a family with siblings. It's the sort of thing that leads to not having a relationship with siblings apart from the parents, right? There are
Once you're
relationships.
grown and adults.
Yeah. Well, even as little kids, like, can your kids get along with each other even when you're not in the room? That's a hard thing. That's not something that usually comes naturally for everybody. You definitely have, the second I leave the room, all of a sudden there's a fight that happened that if I was in the room, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you, again, as a dad, help, as a dad of a lot of female teenagers right now, how do you help continue to be curious?
Well, that one's easy because I don't know what it's like to be a female teenager. So it's really easy to be curious about it because, like, I have no idea. I could see that, like, you do have, it does really help to have empathy as a driving force.
Like in my 30s.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you have to have that skill, but having the desire, having learner, having empathy, having developer, those are really nice for me. There are other ones that are related to that. There are other skills and things that can provide similar behaviors. And tapping into what it is that there's got to be something that curiosity is a part of human nature. So there's some curiosity in you about something. And it needs to be curiosity about people who are not like you. It's so important. If I could figure out a way to, like, help
Bottle it up.
Yeah. It doesn't matter whether you want to understand your kids or not, whether you want to empathize with them or not. They are different than you. They are going to do things that you don't understand. There's no parent who's like, I got my kid 100%. I mean, maybe you're delusional, but I doubt it that it's possible. So if you're going into it knowing I don't know what I'm doing, and that they don't know what they're doing, but I can have a better appreciation for why they do what they do. It's just a good space to be in. Doesn't mean that you're going to be able to control what they do. That's where you hedge into the area where it becomes destructive, and it makes you not want to be curious anymore, because you're like, well, I tried being curious and I didn't get them to do what I wanted, so what's the point?
Yeah.
I do honestly believe that I don't know what's best for my kids.
I think that is a very mature sentence.
I honestly don't believe that I know what's best for my kids. I have some ideas. I have some feelings and impressions. I have things that I feel like have helped me in my life. But I am not a child in 2025. I'm not in high school in Idaho Falls. Like, the things that are a part of my kids' experience are so incredibly specific to them that I can't know what's good for them 100%. I can't know what's the best. I can't maximize or optimize to perfection, because I am very imperfect. I don't know what's best for me. I have some good ideas, and I have some great experiments to run to try out things, and that can be helpful. But there's even things that I know I'm supposed to do that I don't believe that I'm supposed to do. Back to my mom. What she did so many things well. She didn't do everything perfect, but she was always trying. Definitely everything was coming from a place of love, and she was always open and wanting to learn and understand how other people were doing things because she felt inexperienced. My mom, she made a conscious effort to make sure that she was friends, that she had a relationship with each of her kids. and that as adults, she didn't try to tell them what to do.
You're saying once they turned 18, once they became adults.
It definitely happened before then.
Okay.
If my mom thought that we needed some guidance or direction, she would tell us, right? Like if she felt overwhelmed and needed help with cleaning the house, she would tell us. We would have that. It wouldn't be like she was just doing this free parenting thing where Montessori extremism, let them figure it out on their own. No, she would definitely tell us and instruct us as we were young. But as we got older, my mom, it wasn't that she was less involved. She was less involved in directing. She was more involved. It felt very much more like a coach becoming a spectator or a cheerleader. She was there. She wasn't there to tell us what to do. She was there more often to ask us what we thought we were doing, what we thought we should do, and how it was impacting us. She was curious. She was interested. She wasn't separated or avoiding us. But if there was something that we didn't want to talk about or that was hard for us, she also wouldn't push and fight in there. And I think my dad had a different way to go about it, and I think it's important to have that diversity. But my mom was definitely very safe. I never felt like I could tell anything to my mom that would make her love me any less or that would fundamentally change the nature of our relationship. I knew that I could change, but that she was still my mom and she was still interested and she could, and part of this is just who she is, because she can find interesting topics of conversation to have with anybody. She can love anybody. And that's just who she is.
So final thoughts for parents that maybe don't have the strengths that you have. What is a way that they can help prioritize that relationship with their friends, neighbors, coworkers, kids?
I don't do these things perfectly, and I think it is important to not discount the skills and the strengths that they have, because we could not have a world full of just developers. We couldn't have a world of just empaths. We wouldn't get much done. But I think it comes down to changing the definition of success. Success in a relationship, when it comes to not the relationships of choice, the relationships of, what's the word there? Because it's not
The relationships that are thrust upon you.
a little bit, right?
Whether it's neighbors that are geographically connected.
Right.
It's children that are genetically or adopted, right, in some aspect, chosen
But a
without
responsibility that has been
stewardship over.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in those relationships, at some point, it's not about changing the person. The success of that relationship cannot be based on their ability to change, because it's not about that. The relationship has to be based on the two of you coming together. And that's the same thing with like personal development. You can read all the books you want to about how you're going to improve yourself, but there's a part of it that's like, all right, stop thinking about yourself, go out and do, and then come back and do some reflecting and figure out, I did like this, I didn't like this. But then you got to go back out and do again. If you're spending all your time in your own head, that does make it hard to actually develop. We can't develop ourselves by being selfish. We have to be selfless to develop us and to understand what we really love. And the same thing in the relationship. You kind of have to, at some points, just do things together.
And I think young mothers can kind of lean into that too, because sometimes it's not natural. It's clunky to build this relationship.
I would say it's always.
I think that you are way less clunky.
I know, but it's never natural. That's the other part of this. Like, you think about anything. I think this is why I have such a hard time with people talking about successful people talking about their story, because even when they talk about the hard parts, it still feels smooth. The way they discuss it, it just feels like, but like in the moment, we are all failing. The moments of feeling success in a relationship, I would say, are so few and far between. The majority of the time, it feels like we're making mistakes. So if we're going off of vibes, I don't know. It's tough. You don't want to go off of vibes for relationships because I think that'll lead you to closing yourself off.
Because mostly it's rough. It's negative. It's hard.
And it usually comes as a result of being vulnerable. So it's a lot easier to close yourself off and just like talk about the surface level stuff. Or we just don't get into those topics, or we don't talk about that stuff, or we're not really that sort of, because it's just awkward. So
to wrap up, thank you. I love you. In conclusion, Garth, thank you for being curious. Thank you for being...
Thanks for asking such good questions. You turned what was going to be just sitting around for a couple of seconds into a really good... You're really good. And you know how to get people to talk about stuff. And it wasn't about one way's better than the other. But you were making sure to hit the strengths and the things that I do feel comfortable and confident in. So thank you. You did a good job.
I love you.
Amen. I love you too.
Wow, this has been such a fun conversation. Garth's example and perspective always reminds me to stop and think before I jump headfirst into action. He reminds me that the relationship is most important. I love how curiosity leads us to ask better questions. And speaking of curiosity, if you've ever been curious about the real estate market, whether it's buying, selling, or investing, or just wondering what's happening in your neighborhood, I'd love to chat. Real estate isn't just about transactions. It's also about building relationships. If you're thinking about making a move, or even if you're just curious, let's have a conversation. No pressure, no obligations, just good information and honest guidance. You can reach me anytime at 208-254-2226 to schedule a consultation. And if you're local, don't forget, we'd love to meet you at Taco Tuesday. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring. Thanks for being part of the Joyrific community.